Now, before we get to our formal program, I'd like to introduce Ed Loturco. We have a little short subject feature before our main event.
Hi, everybody. What we're having today is just about 10, 12 minutes, whatever, to have a special little presentation here. We have a big show that's coming up in Boston, which is the RV show, auto show. It's taking place at the Convention Center. Bob Zagami, who's the executive director of the New England RV Dealers Association, is here to kind of explain the show itself and also some of the opportunities that he'll have to go over on RV careers. A lot of our guys are coming back from the wars and whatnot, and this is some of the things that they're going to be helping with. So as a veteran himself, as you can see with the Air Force, a good friend of mine, Bob Zagami.
Thank you, Ed. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to do this real quick. I talk fast, but I had a couple of minutes to come and talk to you about the particular show coming up this weekend. You'll see lots of ads this weekend on TV and in the newspapers. So, short of that, the RV industry is probably the best kept secret in this country. It's the $15 billion industry that nobody knows anything about unless they go camping or they went camping when they were a kid. 8.5 million RVs on the road, 16,000 campgrounds. RV loans qualify as second home loan mortgages, as long as an RV has a kitchen, a bath, and a bedroom. 35 to 54 is the age group, which is our largest segment. We've done a lot of advertising to families these days. And obviously the target market now, with 11,000 people turning 50, 10,000 millennials turn 65 every day, it is a hot industry. As such, they need a lot of people. I always show when I do my seminars at the Boston show, I always like to show this because this is how most of us grew up, understanding these television programs and understanding dinner, with your family at night and getting together on weekends and Sundays and what have you. That's all gone now. I don't have to tell you what's happening in our society in terms of the problems that we have with kids and drugs and everything under the sun. So what we sell with the RV industry is we sell fun and making memories the same way we used to do it 40, 50, 60 years ago. Because we find when the families get out into the campground, the kids put the phones away, they put the computers away, you actually have dinner around the campfire, you cook your marshmallows. It's just like when we grow up. This is the last vestige of what America used to be like, and the last time you can do it. I always tell this story. My wife says, please don't tell that story anymore. I have an RV up in Maine. I go up there 4 or 5 nights a week in the summer. When I arrive at the campground, I leave my keys in the car. I open up my park model RV. I leave it open all weekend. There's 3 computers, there's 3 televisions. I leave the keys in the car every night in the campground, and I don't lock anything till I go home on Tuesday morning. Nothing ever happens, because in campgrounds, there's no robberies, there's no fights, there's no gun shooting. So it's an environment that we used to enjoy as we were kids. A lot of different types of RVs. I'm not going to tell you all about them, but we have RVs that go from $5,000 pop-up campers to $2 million buses. So there's an RV for everybody's budget and every way they might want to enjoy the lifestyle. Everything from a Class B up on the left with a Mercedes engine that gets 20 miles a gallon that people now buy for second cars, down to the bottom left, a Class A motorhome that might run you a couple $100,000. Trailers, pop-up trailers, fifth wheel trailers. There's also handicaps, so people, when they become disabled, do not have to give up RVing. Winnebago and Newmar on the bottom left make RVs with wheelchair lifts and straps in the ceiling and rails so that you can get up into the RV and go along the rail and get into the bathroom, get into the driver's seat, get into the bedroom. So you don't have to give up RVing. Top right is a toy hauler. They got smart a few years ago and said, let's put a garage in the back. You can take your boats and your ATVs and your motorcycles with you when you go camping. At the show this Monday, next Monday, week from today, is Veterans Day. Any veteran, active or inactive, gets into the show free of charge. So if you want to go see what RVs are all about, you just want to kill a day, go in on Monday. It's free of charge, and one of our sponsors is the VA. And there is also a whole section in the back with the VA and 6 or 7 related sponsors that have programs for veterans that will be in the show itself. It's the first time that we've ever done that. That's Monday the 18th. Another veteran, Chris Doherty. Chris is an RV certified technician. He'll be doing seminars on maintenance and technology, safety and security in the RVs. And I'll be doing what I call my introduction to RVs and RV lifestyle, which takes this talk and goes about an hour and answers everything that people want to know about it. Where's the career opportunity? If you have children or grandchildren coming home from the wars, we need, right now, today, we need 10,000 certified RV technicians nationwide. Every RV dealer in New England right now can hire RV technicians, can hire people to work on the lots, can hire service writers, parts managers, parts specialists. Best kept secret in the country. But you can walk into any RV dealership today and they need people in the jobs. Technicians, body specialists, chassis specialists, electrical specialists, appliances, certified. And some of these people have 10 to 50 technicians that they need to have hired. There's also a program, a very interesting program that was just announced last year. It's called the National RVIA program, where somebody, and the guy that runs the Work Camper News, came up with the idea, and he said, you know, one of the things we don't have in the industry is RVs are not inspected. There's no inspection program for it. I said, well, why can't we have a program where if somebody's going to buy an RV, especially from a private party, and you don't know what you're buying, why don't we have a program where they can be inspected? Just like the home inspection program. You cannot buy a home today without the bank saying to you, go get a home inspection program. We want the same thing in the RV industry. They need 3,500 people right now to become RV inspectors, not to fix them, just to learn how to inspect them, go through a checklist, go through a computer program, and give the person and the bank a report that says this certified RV is acceptable for a bank loan. It's a big program. It's something that people can walk in. If they come out of the service tomorrow, they can walk into this type of a program, one-week training program, and get right into it. And that's who I am. I have cards over here, and I apologize, but I got to run to see a client up in New Hampshire. There's a rack card on the New England RV Dealers Association. There's certification training booklets there if you know somebody right away who wants it, and you can always get to me through Ed, because I made a cold call on him 30 years ago when I was a young salesman that didn't know what the hell I was talking about, and we developed a nice relationship. So I'll shut up, I'll answer a couple of quick questions if you have them, and if not, I'll turn it back to Ed or Linda and get into your regular talk. All right? Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Are there any questions for Bob? We can take one or two. Yeah?
Yes? No?
Oh, that was terrific.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Who knew that there were so many career opportunities for returning veterans? Let's keep that in mind. Thank you very much. All right. Now let's get on with the introduction of our speaker. We're in for a great program today. Rick Beyer, he's well known right here in Lexington because of his work with the Lexington Historical Society and other local projects. He's an award-winning documentary filmmaker and author, and he's the producer of First Shot. Now, I'm just curious, how many people have actually seen that film, First Shot? Good, glad to know that. If you haven't, you really need to make it a point to do it. The Historical Society runs it on a regular basis. It's an educational short film, 12 minutes, something?
17 minutes.
17 minutes, and it introduces visitors to Lexington in 1775. It's terrific. So several years ago, but it turns out it was 11 years ago, this has been a long journey, Rick learned about a secret World War II military unit that performed deception operations against the German army in Europe after D-Day. The activities of this unit, which were nicknamed the Ghost Army, were top secret. And they remained secret for decades. Well, Rick knew that the story of these troops, whose job was to fool the enemy about the strength and the location of American units, was a great story. And he began his research. In 2013, in the midst of his research, Rick visited us here at the Lexington Veterans Association and told us about the Ghost Army. Well, since then, he's brought the story of the Ghost Army to the public, and may I say, to the world. Today, he returns to tell us more of their adventures and to report on the terrific response that this story is receiving across the globe. This was a story just waiting to be told, and Rick Beyer was the person to tell it. So, without further ado, let's welcome Rick and let's hear the story.
Okay, can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Any sound?
Not through the microphone,
Not
but we
through the
hear you.
microphone, that's bad. Somebody didn't know how to turn their mic on. Looks like it turned itself off.
The volume on that channel may need to be increased.
The TV people are gonna want me to have this on, so I don't know what I'm doing. So we might need emergency assistance, low battery. Ed is low battery. I think we're gonna go for plan B. Hi, everybody. This is so much fun. Yeah. So let's see if I can hold a microphone in one hand and a remote control in the other hand and turn pages with my third hand, and it should work perfectly, right? All right. So you can take that one. And this is loud. Okay. Coming down. Or that's good. Yeah, we had this all perfect. Where were you guys an hour and a half ago? Because it was working perfectly at that point. That might still be on, even though the battery's low. So, if I could turn it down, I would. I'm microphone volume down, 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 down. Better?
Yes.
Better, right? Okay. Did you want to do the introduction again, or should we just? I'll just gotta go with it. So. Yeah, turn off some lights, because they got this one right in my face, so it's really good. So you can turn off all the other ones, and you can still see me, even if you don't want to. So you can all hear me okay, right? Now he hasn't turned it down too low. So thank you very much. I am really delighted to be here. I'm delighted that Bill Johansson asked me to come, but that Bill always leaves. I've never met Bill. He's asked me to speak here twice. He always goes away when I speak. I don't know what he knows that you don't, but he's not here and I am. And I want to thank Linda, who has been very encouraging to me over the years and also has worked hard to get the word out on this presentation today, and of course gave that fine introduction. Thank you. The last time I was here to talk about the Ghost Army was 3 years ago, almost exactly to the day. It was about a week before the theatrical premiere of the documentary up at the Salem Film Festival in Salem, and it was a few months before the film had its national broadcast premiere on PBS. How many of you guys were here 3 years ago? See, a fair amount, okay? You're gluttons for punishment, you guys, okay? But at that time, when I came here, I couldn't really see much further ahead than the documentary airing on PBS, because I had already been working on this project at that point for 8 years. Some of you can remember, I was talking to Phil about this, remember me raising money, desperately trying to raise money, always trying to raise money for years to make the film. Here it was going to have its national broadcast on PBS. I thought that was going to be the finish of what had been kind of a long and hard journey. But it turns out that I had no idea that was going to be the starting point for all sorts of other stuff that was going to happen, and that continues to happen, because this is a journey for me telling this story that's nowhere near as done. So what I'd like to do today is to recap the story of the Ghost Army for those of you who weren't here, or those of you like me whose memory isn't, what it used to be. And then I also want to update you on kind of 5 big things that have happened since the movie came out, the documentary came out 3 years ago, and share a few things that I've learned along the way. So I came across the story of the Ghost Army. I hope this part works. Okay, there we go. I came across the story of the Ghost Army 11 years ago when I met someone whose uncle had been in the unit. And I considered myself pretty well read regarding World War II, but I had never heard this story. I had certainly heard the story of the famous D-Day deception, with British forces and American forces in England trying to deceive the Germans about where the D-Day invasion would take place. But I had never heard this story about a traveling roadshow of deception that the American Army put on that opened a week after D-Day and kept running until the end of the war. A show that tested the proposition that an imaginary army might in some cases be just as powerful as having a real army there. That was something I had never heard of, and I was fascinated by. So I started digging into it, and honestly, I've never stopped. The mission of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, and that was the official name of this unit, their mission was deception. And in particular, the kind of deception they did involved impersonating other American units to fool the Germans about the size and location of those units. So let me give you an example of this. Let's pretend that everybody in the room, from here on over, you guys are all in the 75th Infantry Division. And we want the Germans to think that you're attacking from way over here. So we're going to have Ed. Ed's going to go over here. You don't actually have to go, Ed. You can stay there. Ed's going to go over there and pretend to be the 75th Infantry Division. He's going to pretend to be all of you guys. He's going to make a lot of noise. He's going to set up his inflatable tanks. He's going to do whatever he can and draw the Germans to him over there so that you can all attack this way through the parking lot to great success. And that, in a nutshell, is what the Ghost Army was all about, was that kind of deception, that kind of impersonation. And they did this not once, not twice, but 21 different times. And this is the cover of their official history, which is in the National Archives. And on the cover here is the insignia of every unit that they impersonated. So every one of those units, at least part of that unit, was impersonated at some point during World War II by the men of the Ghost Army. So how do 1,100 men convince the enemy that they are 20,000 or more? Well, the Ghost Army went to war with three kinds of deception. Kind of a multimedia deception unit. They used visual, sonic, and radio. Now, of those three kinds of deception, I have to say that the visual deception is certainly the one that attracts the most attention. They used inflatables. They used inflatable tanks much like this one, although this is actually a replica tank. This is a replica of an inflatable tank, and this is actually footage that we shot with reenactors 1 year ago today in my backyard. But they had real tanks like this. Here's one of the real ones. They had hundreds of them. And they had inflatable artillery. And they had inflatable trucks. They had inflatable jeeps. They even had the inflatable spotter planes that any kind of division would have to, because they had inflatable anything that a real armored or infantry division would have in Europe. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're looking at this and you're saying, well, Rick, that doesn't look very realistic to me. I can tell right away that's fake. That's not going to fool the Germans. It's not going to fool anybody. But of course, you're a lot closer than we're going to let the Germans get when you're looking at this. So if you get a little bit further away, okay, now it's a little harder to tell, isn't it? And we're still closer than we're going to allow the enemy to see. But which one of those is the real one?
The left.
I've heard both, but the left is correct. The real one's on the left. But now imagine that you get farther away and you have hundreds of these kinds of inflatables. You can paint the landscape with a 3D masterpiece. And this is an aerial shot from an actual Ghost Army operation along the Rhine River, Operation Viersen, in March of 1944. And virtually every vehicle in this photo is inflatable. Virtually every single one. And what is it that makes it look so real?
The tracks.
The tracks, right? So here's the thing. It turns out that a 40-ton Sherman tank makes a mark in the ground when you put it there, especially in the springtime, pretty deep mark. Turns out that a 93-pound inflatable tank does not. So how do you make the tank tracks? Well, they had a company of combat engineers in the Ghost Army, equipped with heavy, a couple of bulldozers, heavy equipment, and they used those to make the tank tracks when they were setting up these installations at night. That's the kind of attention to detail that it took to get this done. Now, the soldiers who worked on these inflatable dummies found it a memorable experience, and I have a clip from the film to play you on this, and I just want to make sure that we're going to get some kind of volume here. I'm really hopeful. You know, I'm hopeful about the volume. Give it a shot, and we'll see if we can play this clip here.
There was a little bundle of stuff, which a tank was in, all compressed before you opened the bundle, spread the nozzles around, and inflated it.
Pulling this amorphic shape out of it, and then watching it being filled with air and taking form, you know, like a monster.
If things went very well, there were air compressors. If things went not so well, there were bicycle pumps. And if things went terribly badly, there were our lungs.
In most cases, like a German tank, we could have it inflated and move within 15 or 20 minutes.
The artillery piece was good. The Jeep was good. But that M4 tank, that was the beauty. That was a piece of work. It really was.
Although they didn't see much use, there were also inflatable soldiers.
I didn't care for the personnel. They had some inflatable people. So-so.
I never saw that. I'm sorry I missed that. That would have really made me laugh.
So as you can imagine, the soldiers who, I interviewed 21 veterans of the unit for this documentary. The soldiers who worked with inflatables had many stories. And one of my favorite stories was told by a soldier named Arthur Shilstone. And it was early on when they were still trying to get things straight when they were in Europe. And they'd set up the inflatables, but they didn't have a very good security perimeter. And he was on guard duty when two Frenchmen on bicycles, they'd gotten through the kind of the not very good security perimeter, and now they were in the midst of their camp and they were trying to get them to go away. And he said, as he's trying to move them on, he said, they're not looking at me, they're looking over my shoulder. And what they thought they saw was 4 GIs lifting a Sherman tank and turning it around. And Arthur said, they're looking at me, they're looking for answers, and finally I just said, the Americans are very strong. So that was the visual deception. That's the first kind of deception. The second kind of deception they used was sonic deception. And this involved using recorded sounds to fool the enemy. So they recorded, again, imagine any sound that a division on the move or pulling into the line can make. Trucks, tanks, assembling of equipment, bridge building, all these different things. They recorded them onto a series of sound effects records, and then they could play them from these half tracks, which were equipped with 500-pound speakers on top, with a range of about 15 miles. And they would mix together a specific program for any given deception that they were doing to match that particular deception. And then they would record these on a wire recorder. Who remembers the wire recorder? We do have a few people who are willing to admit that they remember the wire recorder. And I brought a wire here, and I've just run out of hands, so I'm going to put my mic down for a second. You can kind of see, or maybe not see, how it just broke, but how thick this wire is. It's like fishing line. If I hold it up here, you can almost see the shadow of it. It's like a piece of fishing line. 6 feet of this holds 1 second of sound. Got that much? 6 feet of this holds 1 second of sound. And so it's magnetized, just like magnetic tape. It's magnetic wire. Don't ask me any more details about that technology. That's as far as my knowledge goes. But they would record, so this would hold about 30 minutes of sound. And of course, the great thing about recording on a wire, as opposed to using the sound effects records, is what? It's never going to skip. Right? If you're using a record, you could have a skip. That's going to kind of give it away to the enemy. So using recorded sound to fool the enemy was incredibly effective by all accounts. And I want you just to test that. I want you just to close your eyes for a moment and imagine that you're up at the front. You're on guard duty on some dark and lonely night. And you're straining to hear what the enemy is doing. the distance, and you hear sounds. Maybe they're a lot lower than this. Maybe they're just in the distance, but you hear them. And your imagination starts to build. What is it out there? What's it going to be? It's really would be very effective. It would convince you in that environment that you were hearing tanks, that you were hearing stuff moving in. One of the Ghost Army veterans, Dick Syracuse, told a story. He said, first of all, he said that sometimes this was so effective that even though he knew there were no tanks there, he could see them. He could start to see them in the night because there was such a powerful trick on your brain. And so he told a story once. He was out on guard duty up by one of the Sonic trucks up near the front, and they're playing the sounds out across the river to the Germans. And a colonel, an American Army colonel from a cavalry mechanized regiment that's in the same area, comes up to Syracuse, who's a young lieutenant, and he goes, "Son, what the hell's going on here?" And Syracuse says, "Well, what do you mean, Colonel?" And he says, "Well, what the hell are those tanks doing here? There's not supposed to be any tanks here." Now, Syracuse figures that he's not usually supposed to tell anybody, but it's a high-ranking officer of the unit that they're in the line with, that he should be honest with him. He says, "Well, sir, there actually aren't any tanks here." And at that point, the colonel just throws a fit, and he's expletive deleted left and right. "I heard goddamn tanks are in here, and you can't tell me there's no tanks here," etc., etc. Finally, he managed to communicate to him that this was a deception. Turns out that the colonel, he'd missed the briefing, right? He was the guy who didn't get the word about the deception, and so he didn't know about it. But it stands to figure that if you can fool one of your own officers who's right there with the sound trucks practically on top of you, that you can fool the enemy who has no idea what's going on. So the third type of deception that they did was radio deception. And I think for all of you guys who are veterans, pretty simple idea, right? Any real unit in the field is going to have a network of radios. So we're going to create a fake radio network that can portray all of the normal communications of a battalion, regiment, division on the move. This particular radio operator, Stan Nance, that's his truck, which he nicknamed Kilowatt Command. And he was one of these guys. And most of this communication is by Morse code. So turns out the Germans were so sophisticated they could recognize the fist, the transmitting style, of the American Morse code operators. So the Ghost Army guys had to learn how to replicate the fist. They had to learn how to mimic the telegraph operators that they were impersonating in order to fool the Germans. So, excuse me. They went to war with three kinds of deception. And while they were there on the ground, they developed a fourth kind of deception, and it became known as special effects. And the idea bubbled up kind of from the bottom, from the enlisted men and some of the junior officers, one of whom I'm going to tell you about a little later. And it involved turning every one of them into actors. Here's another clip from the documentary about that.
Moving through the French villages so recently occupied by the Germans, they saw an opportunity to improvise yet another way to sell their deceptions, targeting enemy spies that might have stayed behind. They called it special effects.
Why don't we put a stencil of the name of the unit that we were simulating right on the trucks? And why don't we start a counterfeit shoulder patch factory where they would see we were the 75th Division, one of the divisions we did.
Sometimes they used actual patches from the unit they were impersonating. Other times, they had to hand paint their own knockoffs.
So we began to put on their patches and put their bumper markings on, and we physically assumed the role. Only for every 100 of them, there might be 10 of us.
We had a sewing kit. That's one of the things that was required that we carry with us all the time.
Give us the patches and we were good at sewing them on. Seamstresses.
My shirts were all wrecked from having sewn so many different shoulder patches on.
They even set up phony command posts. and against all Army regulations, staffed them with counterfeit commanders.
If you're going to bring a division up, you better have a headquarters somewhere, and there better be a major general walking around. And so we had to have a full general do this. Some sergeant would wear 2 stars for an operation.
Our job was to go in with our phony markings and phony stories that we were pretending to be officers and soldiers from another organization. And we were turned loose in town. Go to the pub, order some omelets, and talk loose.
A lot of the guys went to the bakery, got rolls and stuff, and said, "We got to get an extra supply because we're moving out tonight," that kind of thing.
It was almost kind of silly, really. But I think what really confirmed the fact that there was effectiveness was sitting in a cafe and seeing a door open up gradually and somebody was taking pictures.
We find out if like a division or a special unit had a particular song that they like to sing. We get blitzed and then sing their song.
War is hell. Yes. So 4 kinds of deception. How did it look to the Germans? So imagine now that you are a German intelligence officer with a front row seat for this carefully choreographed multimedia show. So it starts with radio. You pick up a transmission from a unit. You know, how far away are they? Maybe they're 50 miles away. It's coded. You can't understand what they're saying, but you understand from the transmissions that it's moving towards you, moving towards the line. And the operators have the distinctive style of operators for the 6th Armored Division. So now you're looking for the 6th Armored Division. So you're not going to be surprised when your spotters hear the sounds of tanks and trucks moving in at night. So you send out a reconnaissance plane, and you try to grab some pictures if the Allied air superiority lets you. And if you're able to take any pictures, what you're going to see is tanks in a place that there weren't tanks there the night before. And at the same time, any spies that you've left behind in the villages are reporting to you that there are 6th Armored vehicles moving through, that there's a 6th Armored headquarters being set up. And now the Americans have you thinking exactly what we want you to be thinking. And that truly is the magic of the Ghost Army. So they did 21 different deceptions with some great successes. In July 1944, they tricked the enemy about where General George Patton was headed, making it seem like he was headed towards the coast, when in fact he was breaking out across France. In September, they helped hold at an undermanned part of George Patton's line. In December, they masked some of the moves to relieve Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge. And as the war neared its end, they put on their last and biggest deception on the Rhine River to fool the Germans where the U.S. 9th Army was crossing the Rhine River. And a top-secret Army report on the Ghost Army done 30 years later characterized their exploits this way: rarely, if ever, has there been a group of such a few men which have so great an influence on the outcome of a major military campaign. Now, in addition to the dazzling deceptions that they did, there's another part of the story that has always held special power for me. When the U.S. Army created the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, it drew together different units to make up this unit, because it had to happen very quickly. So they drew on existing units. And to do the visual deception, they picked a camouflage unit, the 603rd Camouflage Engineers, and that's a unit that was filled with artists. Okay, because it makes sense. If you're doing camouflage work, you want to have artists who have a great visual eye. But just like they can help you to hide something, they can also help you to show something, maybe make it seem like they've tried to camouflage it, but they've done it badly on purpose. So they have artists handling the visual deception. And these artists painted and sketched their way across the battlefields of Europe. And in doing so, created their own artworks with a unique perspective on the war. And I have collected at this point hundreds and hundreds of these artworks. Not the originals, because the families keep those, or the places that have them, but I have digital copies. And they present, I just think, an amazing view of World War II that's completely different than what you get from photographs, what you get from a film coverage, and it's kind of haunting, it's very intimate, and to me it's an important part of the story. And some of these artists went on to become quite famous. Two I'll mention briefly. Bill Blass, the fashion designer, was a 21-year-old kid from Indiana serving in this unit. That's his notebook on the right, by the way, from his time in the war. He was drawing women's fashions even when he was in the foxhole there. And Ellsworth Kelly, the very famous minimalist painter and sculptor who died a week or two ago at age 92. He also served in the Ghost Army, and this is a piece of his work during the war, which, if you're familiar with his post-war work, is very, very different from that. Now, that in a nutshell is the story that I came and told here 3 years ago, and that we told in the PBS documentary. And that documentary was then seen by millions of people, both in the United States and in 21 other countries that it was broadcast in. And that opened a lot of doors. And so what I led to a lot of great things. I'm going to talk about sort of five things that led to that I think are really exciting and that you might want to know about. And the first one is the Ghost Army book. And that's exciting to me, so I want you to know about it, which I have one here. I have a bunch actually over there, which I'm selling afterwards. But before the documentary came out, we tried to get a book deal. Nobody was interested. After the documentary came out, suddenly people were interested. So this book came out in April of this year. It's called The Ghost Army of World War II. I won't read the very long subtitle. And it's by myself and my co-author, Elizabeth Sales, whose father also served in the Ghost Army. And on the back, do I have one here? On the back of the book, we have this fabulous quote from Tom Brokaw, a nice blurb in which he said he enjoyed it enormously. I hope he actually read it. I don't know if he just enjoyed looking at it. But, and if we have time for questions later, ask me how we got that quote, and I'll tell you the secret of that. So one of the great things about doing the book is that we got to cover a lot of stuff that we couldn't fit into the documentary, that there wasn't space for. And one thing we just skimmed over in the documentary, but we really cover in the book, is how this unit came to be. Whose idea was it? And it's a really interesting story, because it turns out the Ghost Army was born from a marriage of opposites, from two men who were very, very different, both officers. On the right, Ralph Ingersoll, Major Ralph Ingersoll, and on the left, Lieutenant Colonel Billy Harris. And I'm drying up here, so I may need some more water, Ed. It's a thirsty room. So, the guy on the right here is Ralph Ingersoll, and in the 1940s, Ralph Ingersoll was a famous, sort of a celebrity journalist, a controversial celebrity left-wing journalist. He had been involved in the creation of Life magazine, Fortune magazine. He started his own newspaper in New York, PM. He wrote books. He met with people like Roosevelt and Stalin. He was very well known. But he ended up, the New York Times referred to him, I always love this quote, as a prodigiously energetic egotist, which is saying something, I think. And he also had a reputation of being a liar. I mean, quite literally, a fellow officer once said, "I've never met anyone who was such a bright guy who was such a goddamned liar." Which, if you think about it, is a great pedigree for a deception officer, right? This is, you're working from experience, okay? So, in 1943, he's a staff officer in London. And his boss there is this guy on the left, Billy Harris. And Billy Harris is sort of the opposite of Ralph Ingersoll. Billy Harris is a button-down West Point graduate. His father was a general. His uncle was a general. Billy went on to command the 7th Cavalry in the Korean War and became a general himself eventually. So very much the military tradition, as opposed to Ingersoll, who'd been a civilian before he got into the military. And so, thrown together by war, these two men from very different backgrounds came together and created the Ghost Army. Ingersoll was kind of the wild idea, pie in the sky guy, and Harris was the how can we make this actually work on the ground with real military units guy. And what they were both trying to do was give Eisenhower and the forces that were going to be landing in Normandy, once they got through with the Normandy invasion, give them every advantage possible in fighting the Germans. And so they came up with the idea of this multimedia deception unit, which had, although all kinds of deception had been done, mobile multimedia deception unit really had never happened. So this was really a first, and it's something that those two guys came up with. And as a person famous in civilian life, Ingersoll had a lot of entree with higher-ranking officers, including people like Omar Bradley and George Patton, which helped in the development of deception planning. And Patton, it turns out, was a great favorite of the deception planners. They loved working with George Patton. Now, what do we know when we think about George Patton? We think of him as kind of gruff and cantankerous and domineering and sort of difficult. Now, here's what Colonel Harris, here's what he said about George Patton. He said, he was the greatest team player that we ran into over there. He would do anything you asked him to in the interest of the overall picture. So I think that says a lot about one of the reasons why General Patton is so successful. He was very open to this kind of innovation that the Ghost Army represented. There's another officer who didn't make it into the documentary who's a fantastic character in the story. His name is Fred Fox, and he was only a junior officer. He was a lieutenant and I think eventually a captain in the unit, but he actually played a big part in their success. And Fred was he was a Princeton guy. He was musical comedy, the Triangle Club at Princeton. He fancied himself the next Jimmy Stewart. He went out to Los Angeles in 1939, and I think he ended up writing baby food commercials. I mean, he did not quite become the next Jimmy Stewart. But he never lost that theatrical flair. And when the Army, in their good judgment, decided to put him into this unit, into the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, it was a really good choice, because he became a huge advocate for the special effects that I was talking about earlier, and saying that the only way they were going to succeed in their deceptions was to really throw themselves into the show. He wrote this memo. This is an actual memo he wrote to his superior officers. The attitude of the 23rd Headquarters towards their mission is lopsided. There is too much military and not enough showmanship. I don't know, can any of you imagine writing that memo to your superior officer? How that's going to go over? Actually went over pretty well in Fred's case. They ended up turning that around and making it a memo from the colonel back to the rest of the unit. And he was particularly adamant that they had to be able to impersonate general officers, even though that was contrary to all Army regulations. And this is what he wrote about that. He says, "Is not the whole idea of impersonation contrary to Army regulations? Remember, we are in the theater business. If we can't do a complete job, we might as well give up. You can't portray a woman if bosoms are forbidden." So Fox and his bosoms argument won the day. And the other thing that's great about Fred Fox, and that I'm so glad we were able to have him in this book, he wrote the official history of the Ghost Army that we saw the cover of earlier. And I have to tell you, I think it is safe to say this is the most entertaining unit history ever written. It appears in U.S. Army official archives. It was classified for 40 years. It's open to the public now. And on page after page, you can see the twinkle in Fox's eye. And so, for instance, he wrote on working with inflatable dummies, "Officers who had once commanded 32-ton tanks felt frustrated and helpless with the battalion of rubber M4s, 93 pounds, fully inflated. The adjustment from man of action to man of wile was most difficult. Few realized at first that one could spend just as much energy pretending to fight as actually fighting. And on a notable occasion when the unit liberated, I'm going to put liberated in quotes, liberated a stash of cognac, Fox wrote this, in the official U.S. Army history of the unit, by clever manipulation, the 23rd was able to garner 520 cases of cognac. This was enough liquid to drive one Jeep 22,000 miles if cognac would explode. And don't think it wouldn't. So this bivouac area became known as Cognac Hill. And actually there's many Ghost Army veterans who will, well, when there were more of them alive, who would slyly ask you if you'd heard about the Battle of Cognac Hill and the somewhat difficult 3 or 4 days that passed after they found this stash of cognac. Their memories of it are fairly dim. So the book is number one of the things I wanted to tell you about. The second thing is Hollywood. Hollywood came calling on this story. People are very excited that some big-time Hollywood producers are working now to try to make the Ghost Army into a Hollywood film. You know, not the documentary, but a real big-budget Hollywood film. And they're like, they say, "Wow, you know, what did you do? How did you get that? What did you do to make that happen?" And I'm afraid my answer is pretty prosaic. I answered the phone, and I said yes. That's pretty much what I did. It wasn't too hard. So even before the documentary got produced, I started getting calls from people in Hollywood, from producers, screenwriters, directors, and these increased as the documentary was on PBS and then as the book was in development. And some of them were people, well-known people with track records. Some of them were people just kind of taking a flyer. And we tried to work with a few of them, but nothing ever gelled until, quite literally, the 23rd person to call. I keep a list. I have a list of them all. The 23rd person to call, last February 13th, almost a year ago, called me up and he left a message on my phone number. His name's Andrew Lazar. He left a message on my phone number and he said, "I'm Andrew Lazar, I'm a producer affiliated with Paramount, I love the Ghost Army story and I'd love to talk to you about it, and can you call me back?" And it's like, okay, you know, I'm not terribly excited because this is call number 23 and nothing's ever happened so far. But before I call back, I Google, who is Andrew Lazar? Because have you heard of Andrew Lazar? Yeah, I hadn't heard of Andrew Lazar either. And then I see Andrew Lazar, producer, American Sniper. Andrew Lazar, 20 movies to his credit, like Space Cowboys and 10 Things I Hate About You. Oh, and American Sniper. Did I mention American Sniper? And so suddenly I was very nervous because he had called me and left a message, and it wasn't his flunky who called me or his assistant. He had called and left a message. So I called him back and they put me through to him and we started talking, and he was talking about how much he'd seen the documentary and he liked it. And then he said this phrase. I don't know if he says this to all the girls, but it certainly worked for me. He said, "I can't imagine a world in which I don't want to make this movie." Like, you had me at hello. So, you know, conversations and contracts and deals, and he optioned the documentary and the book that I co-wrote with Liz Sales. And they are now developing this, and Bradley Cooper is also involved in this project as one of the producers, and supposedly interested in starring. Now this is Hollywood, so you know this could all be smoke. It could all go away. There could never be a movie. There could be a movie when all of us are long in the grave. There could be a movie in 2 years. All of those things are possible. And so I have absolutely no idea. But there's a screenwriter right now who's working on a screenplay. Great guy. His name is Henry Gaden. I talk to him frequently because he calls me and asks me questions about the unit. And I'm really excited that he is really kind of wants to be true to the story. You know, he wants to be, he's read everything I've sent him. I sent him all the interviews that I did with everybody, all the source materials that I used. He's read all of it. I think he knows more about this unit than I do at this point, because he's read it all recently, and I read some of it 10 years ago. And so I'm very excited to see what he comes up with. And then I got a call from him over Christmas, and he said that his college friend, a close friend from college, had reached out to him. Turned out he was a grandson of a Ghost Army veteran. So now there's this connection. Oh, so fingers crossed. We hope that it all leads to good stuff. And my sister said the other day, she said, "I can't wait till I walk into a theater and it's like, it's the coming attractions and they're like, coming, the Ghost Army." And I said, "You can't wait." Oh my God, I can't wait. So knock on wood that moment comes to happen. So the third thing I wanted to talk about was sort of on the road, Ghost Army on the road, because ever since the documentary came out, I've been traveling and talking about this all over the country. This is a presentation I did on Veterans Day in Wausau, Wisconsin. This is half the audience here, because the other half's on the other side of the gym. 1,500 middle school and high school students. and incredibly enthusiastic, wanting to hear about the Ghost Army, hungry to know about it. So really, really exciting that this story, which has been so little known for so long, is now really, thanks to our efforts and other efforts, becoming well known. And one of the great things about being on the road is the people that you get to see. And one of the great sets of people I get to see is Ghost Army veterans who I haven't seen in a while. So this is a picture in New York with a few of the veterans of this unit, taken in April. And this gentleman right here, Gil Seltzer. Gil Seltzer just turned 101. He still drives himself to work every day. Think about that sentence for a while. He drives himself to work every day. He's an architect. He called me the other day. He said, "Rick, I got a new car." I said, "That's nice, Gil." He said, "Yeah, I got a 3-year lease. Think I'm gonna make it?" Not betting against you, Gil. But now here's also interesting. This gentleman here, Seymour Nussenbaum. Seymour is a guy who I had not met until about a year ago. So didn't know him when I did the documentary. Didn't know him when we did the Ghost Army book. But I met him, and I went to his house in New Jersey, and he's got this couple of fabulous scrapbooks full of all his pictures and stuff. He took the entire summer after he came back from the war to put the scrapbooks together before he, I guess in the fall, before he started school in the winter of 1945. And so what Seymour did in the Ghost Army, he was a counterfeiter. Now, he didn't counterfeit money, he counterfeited shoulder patches, okay? We talked about that, right? Fake shoulder patches. So they're doing these deceptions. We need to pretend to be the 75th, but we maybe can't get, through procurement channels, 1,000 75th Infantry Division patches on a moment's notice. So they had a factory section, 12 guys, whose job was to make these fake patches. And Seymour was one of them, and in his notebook, he has all this stuff documenting the process by which they made the fake patches. I'm a history geek. I'm loving this stuff, right? So this is actually, shows you the different steps for silk screening a 75th Infantry Division patch with 3 colors, right? Red, blue, and green, and they did it on tent canvas. They would cut squares of tent canvas to make these fake patches. And he estimates that over the course of the war, they made 40,000 fake patches. So they made them not only for the deceptions that they did, they stockpiled some for deceptions they thought they would likely do. And of course, they didn't only do divisional patches. You can see here they also did corps patches. So that can be 2 patches per person. So this was the counterfeiting that he was involved with, and it's just so exciting to keep learning new stuff about this story as we go along. And the Ghost Army, we've also taken it to Europe. So we've done screenings in Paris and Luxembourg, and this is a picture of a screening in Luxembourg. We did another screening in Germany, in Wiesbaden, Germany. They loved it in Germany. It turns out they were involved in the war. Who knew? Okay, they're very big there. Bad joke. Very popular in Germany. I mean, I was a little nervous, but it turns out they know that they lost, and so they're cool with that. And then we went to this town in Normandy called Trevier, and we did a screening there last July 4th. And Trevier figures in the story because it's the first place in Normandy that the Ghost Army was billeted. And the artists in the unit went into the bombed-out church in Trevier. The church has been rebuilt since then, and they were painting and sketching there. And it's kind of one of the first places where they saw the destruction of war, so it was very, very moving to them. And as they were painting and sketching, the children in the town, who were some orphans, some just children of families, were kind of gawking, looking over their shoulders, and so they would paint them too. And one of the soldiers did a painting of this boy, Paul Grevet. Now, Paul Grevet no longer lives in Trevier, but his family still does. And we were able to track him down, and he came back for the screening we did, Paul Grevet, and we gave him a copy of this painting. He had never seen it before. And so there's Paul today on the right, and on the left he's a retired Renault engineer. Am I saying that right? French majors? Okay, a Renault engineer. And he gave me a gift, and I want to show you the gift that he gave me. I brought it with me. And we met, it was July 4th when we met. And believe me, everybody in France and Normandy knows what July 4th means to Americans. And he was eager to give me this gift, and he doesn't speak English, so our innkeeper was translating. And basically what he said is, I am a Norman guy in Normandy, and I am giving you a gift that comes all the way from America. And I opened up the gift. And I'm going to show it to you. I don't know if you can see this very well. You can see what this is. This is the gift that he gave to me. And it's got a plaque and a little label there. Can you see this? Anybody know what this is?
Bow tie. Bow tie? Piece of coal?
Here we'll try.
Part of a boot?
I'll hand it around. Somebody's going to tell me what this is. It's shrapnel. It's a piece of shrapnel from a U.S. Navy gun. Because what destroyed that church in Trevier? Okay, well, guess what? It wasn't the Germans, right? It was the American Navy firing both before D-Day and on D-Day because, and of course you fire at the church towers because they are sniper nests, they are observation posts, and they had pretty much knocked out the church tower in this church. And he collected, as a boy, his house was across the street from the church, so they hid out in the fields for 2 days. They come back, he collected these pieces of shrapnel, kept them in a box for 70 years, and then gave one to me and one to my co-author, Liz Sales. That was and I mean, it's something. And if you, I mean, it's not something you want to be hit with, I can tell you that. It's a very heavy thing. So, I mean, it's great to have these experiences and connect with people the way we have been able to through the Ghost Army. And Trevier is one of the stops on the Ghost Army tour. And I recognize that we are now running short on time, so I'm going to not take too much longer. But I want to tell you about the tour, because we did one last September, and we're doing it again this September. And I certainly would love all of you to come. And I have tour brochures over on the side. We do the tour through Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours. And we start out in England, near Stratford. Well, we start out in London, but we go up to Stratford, and then basically we go all the way following the route of the Ghost Army. And in Walton Hall, in England, this is where the Ghost Army first started working with inflatable tanks, so that's what we do when we're at Walton Hall. We have kind of a deception school to teach people how deception was carried out. And then we cross over on a ferry to Normandy, and we spent 2 days in Normandy going to both Ghost Army sites as well as, you know, Omaha Beach, Utah Beach, Saint Mary Glaze. And when we went to Trevier, the mayor came out, and they actually the town council held a reception for us. They were so excited that we were there. And the gentleman here, this is a Ghost Army veteran who came with us on this trip. And we also had a lot of family members of Ghost Army veterans, and they all brought their notebooks and their pictures and paintings and photos, so that was very exciting. And we go through Paris, and then after Paris, we stop at the Surrender Museum. You know, whether you come on our tour or not, if you have any interest in World War II and you're in Europe, in the town of Reims, which is spelled R-E-I-M-S, but not pronounced that way, right? They have the Surrender Museum. It's in a school. This is where the Germans surrendered, and basically they surrendered in the map room, and then the Americans just left it. They left all the maps up there on the walls the way it is, so you can go in, and it's behind glass now, but you can see exactly what it looked like the day the Germans came and surrendered. We also did a couple of sites related to the Battle of the Bulge in Bastogne. We hooked up actually in Bastogne with Helen Patton, who's the granddaughter of George Patton. She actually made chili for everybody in the tour at one of the museums we were at. She's a friend going back a while. And then we finally ended up in Luxembourg, and in the American Cemetery in Luxembourg, we visited the grave of the only Ghost Army soldier who is buried there. General Patton's grave is at the front of the same cemetery. And we spent 2 days in Luxembourg because they spent 3 months there, so we had a lot of sites to visit there. But I'm running through the water. There's probably going to be a water shortage in Lexington tonight. But it was a great trip, and a lot of fun, and I mean, by the time we were done with it, I think, I started out with 29 people who I barely knew, and by the time we were done, it felt like we were friends for life. And the most amazing thing was 2 days after this trip, we did the screening in Wiesbaden that I told you about. I've seen this film 1,000 times. I mean, literally 1,000 times. And I sat there in the audience of that film, gripping my chair and almost crying, because now I had just been to all those places again. And it's amazing how much more real, how much closer it comes, how much you understand the story more by being in the places where it really happened. So that's the Ghost Army tour, and hopefully we'll be doing that again for many years. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was our effort to get recognition for this unit. The World War II generation is slipping away, and it won't be long before the Ghost Army is essentially an army of ghosts. And so I think it's time that they receive official recognition for their efforts, which, by some accounts may have saved 15 or 20,000 lives in the fighting in Europe. Hard to know, but those are numbers that officials have used. And they never really received recognition in the war because their unit was so secret. So I have set out to try to change that, and I've worked and made an effort to get bipartisan legislation introduced in Congress to award a Congressional Gold Medal to the Ghost Army. And I want to say this is very different from a Medal of Honor. That's not that at all. The Congressional Gold Medal is something that Congress can vote to give. They gave one to the Monuments Men, they gave one to the WASPs, they gave one to the Code Talkers, they gave one to George Washington too, but that was a while ago. And I think that it's a great a way to honor the Ghost Army. And I'm working with, this was introduced by Representative Annie Custer of New Hampshire, a Democrat, and Representative Peter King of New York, a Republican. It's H.R. 2170. And what we're trying to do now is encourage other congressmen to co-sponsor it, because the way this works, you actually need to have 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate co-sponsor the bill before it can be voted on in committee. So if you're moved now or have been moved by the story of the Ghost Army, and you want to support this, contact your congressman and ask them to co-sponsor House Resolution 2170. And if you talk to somebody in their office and you get a name of the staff person, email me and tell me the name, and I'll have somebody from Congressman Custer's office contact them and keep working that angle. 500 years ago, the political philosopher Machiavelli said, "Though fraud and all other actions be odious, yet in matters of war it is laudable and glorious." And the men of the Ghost Army were not textbook heroes, but they served with ingenuity, courage, and honor, and they put themselves essentially in the line of fire to draw fire away from other soldiers so that they might live, so that they might fight. And one Ghost Army soldier put it this way: if one mother or one new bride was spared the agony of putting a gold star in their front window, that's what the 23rd headquarters was all about. And that strikes me as something that Machiavelli might find laudable and glorious. I certainly do. I hope you do. Telling the story of the Ghost Army has been one of the great adventures of my life. I'm grateful for the opportunity. I hope that you'll invite me back again in 3 or 5 or 10 years, and that there'll be a whole lot more to tell at that time. Thank you very much. Now, if anybody's still awake, questions. This gentleman was first, so you can go first.
Were there any operations that either failed or backfired, or that the Germans saw through?
Yes, yes, and no. Did you want more information than that?
Yes.
Yes. So there were certainly a number of operations. I mean, failure in this case would simply, it depends on how you define failure. If failure is that you didn't get the enemy to move the way you wanted them to, I guess that's failure. So there were times when they portrayed a unit, but there's no evidence that the enemy noticed them or they didn't react to them the way they wanted to. There was one operation that backfired horribly. We talk about it in both the documentary and the book. We, go right there, where they essentially were trying to draw German attention to a certain spot, and then due to a miscommunication, a real armored attack was launched from that spot. So now we've drawn all the German 88s, they're all pointed at me, and now you decided you're going to do a real attack from this direction. Well, the tanks never even got to the line of departure. They were pretty much just torn apart by it. And it was a very sobering moment. A lot of the Ghost Army veterans talk about this. And it was sort of a lesson in the importance of communication. You cannot do deception in a vacuum. Everybody involved at the planning level needs to understand what's going on. So while you have to keep operational secrecy, you also have to communicate to the right group of people. It's a kind of a fine line. The Germans, however, never discovered that this unit was operating as a deception unit. We have no records that suggest that, and we've looked over the course of the war. So yes, yes, and no are the answer to your questions, and those are the details. Who was next with a question? We'll go here, and then we'll come back.
I understand that, of course, D-Day was in June, right in the middle of summer, and that a overweight officer on Patton's staff was seen a number of times buying winter clothing that wouldn't fit him, but was Patton's size. He was buying like underwear and socks that would fit Patton, but wouldn't fit him, and so the Germans had the illusion that the invasion was going to be in the summertime, it was going to be in the fall or the winter.
Well, or that it was going to be in Norway was another possibility.
In Norway,
that was a deception that was also carried out. Patton's very interesting story because, you know, in the movies and in the history books, he's often portrayed as being very reluctant and angry about being involved in the D-Day deception, which is what you're talking about, the deception before D-Day. And yet, he seems to have been really tight with the deception planners, knew them all pretty well, involved in a lot of different deceptions. So I think that, you know, maybe the fact him being irritated at being involved in deception, maybe that was a deception, because I think he was a very wholeheartedly involved in all sorts of different deceptions. Sir, you had a question.
Yeah, just kind of a follow-up to Walter's question. Did it ever occur where Germans got close enough to any of these vehicles to take one hot shot at one and the whole thing just collapsed?
Oh, so right. So the question is, did anybody ever take a pot shot at a, or artillery fire, right, at a tank and have it blow up like that? Well, okay, the tanks actually weren't built quite that way because they were smart enough to figure out that could happen. So the tanks are inflatable, but they are built on a skeleton of inflatable tubes. Tubing is, I think, 4 6-inch tubing, like this diameter. So you have a skeleton of tubing with which you inflate in multiple places, right? So there's different compartments, and then you have the skin of the tank over that, and then an inflatable turret and gun barrel over that. So shrapnel goes through one piece of that tubing, or a gunshot goes through a piece of that tubing. It's gonna cause the tank to sag a little bit, but it's not going to have that kind of big effect that's going to be obvious to an enemy firing from a long ways away. And they did have to do a lot of patching of these because they were often taking shrapnel from artillery fire. They were, except for, I mean, they did suffer casualties. They had 3 men killed, about 2 or 3 dozen wounded. But I mean, for a unit of 1,100 men, that's very small casualties. And so they were very, very lucky, very lucky. Do we have time for one more? Where are we at? We have time?
I think this gentleman's been waiting quite a while.
Oh my God, I've been ignoring him. I'm coming right over.
You just answered all, you just asked, I just want to know if there are any casualties in this whole thing.
I just answered his question. That's how good I am. That's how great I'm treating you. I answered a question before you asked it. But yes, and so I mentioned the man who's buried in the cemetery, George Paddle. He's the only one buried in Europe. There were 2 other people killed who were buried, you know, their bodies were brought back to the U.S. and buried here. Now it's your turn.
I have both a question and a comment. Question.
It better be a nice comment. Okay, never mind.
The question is, why was this maintained as secret for as long as it was?
Do I have to answer before I get the comment? Okay.
Well, the comment is about deception elsewhere.
Okay, I will answer the why did it have to be kept secret? I don't know. So my answer is an educated guess. The experts that I've talked to suggested that the Army had an interest in preserving the secrets of this deception technique for use in the Cold War. so that if we were going to war with the Russians, that this was something that we might have at our beck and call. And you know, not all of the soldiers in the unit were told to keep it secret. Some were and some weren't. I think that the things that the Army was most interested in keeping secret were the sonic deception, because it was pretty new, and the way that everything was coordinated together. But even so, there was a leak. There was a leak in 1945. And what happened is that a soldier from Worcester, Sebastian Messina, came home on leave. They'd all come back to the US. They were prepping to go to Japan. He's on leave. And he tells the whole story to a reporter for the Worcester Telegram. Whole story, every bit of it. I mean, pretty complete. And the Worcester Telegram reporter writes an article, and they submit it to the censor. And the censor says, no, you can't print this. And so they shelve it. The war ends after the bomb is dropped on Japan a few weeks later. The censorship office closes, and the Worcester Telegram says, guess we can run this story now. So they run a full big front page story on it in 1945, and it's picked up by other newspapers. So there's a flurry of publicity around this unit in 1945, November, which the Army, I mean, they can't really do anything about it, so they let it go, but then they classify the official history as being secret, and they refuse multiple times to release that earlier than they did, which was in the 1980s. So some of it, was it just bureaucratic, you know, momentum, or was it to keep it from the Russians, or was it something else? Those are all possibilities.
In the comment, my brother-in-law, Peter Glazer, who lived in Lexington, served as a tank driver with the Czech Brigade, which was initially attached to Montgomery's army and later to Patton's. And after the armies had driven up the French coast, they had bottled a sizable contingent of Germans in Dunkirk. And the deception was a sonic one, where the Czech tanks drove up and down and back and forth, making a lot of noise to make the Germans believe that there was a large unit holding in, whereas it was a few thousand.
Wow. Well, I mean, you know, they say that deception is as old as war, right? And General Wesley Clark said when I interviewed him that every army practices deception. If they don't, they're going to lose, and they know it. So deception is important. I'm going to say thank you very much for coming. This has been great. I really appreciate the time. And I do have books and DVDs for anybody who wants to buy them, tour brochures. I'm hanging out to answer any more questions you have. Thanks for spending part of your day with me. Thank you so much.